This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 46, Using DiSC to Profile Your Audience. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you attract and retain business through the power of quality content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is November 21st, 2013. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for episode number 46 of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, we are live on iTunes and on Stitcher, so if you're listening to this episode on the blog, you can click on over and subscribe. That means you'll get new episodes automatically delivered to your computer or your smartphone or your tablet or your listening device of choice. And if you use a different app for your podcast listening pleasure, we also have an RSS feed, and I will provide that link in the blog post. In last week's podcast, we had a terrific chat about storytelling with Catherine Carr of Haiku Deck. If you happen to miss that episode, please feel free to click on over to iTunes or to Stitcher or to the RSS feed and get all caught up. So that brings me to today's topic. Today we're talking about using the DiSC system to add depth to your audience profiles. Here on the podcast, we've talked several times about the importance of really knowing your audience. And we've also discussed the importance of creating personas. So taking the information about your audience and creating some made-up characters that really represent the qualities of your ideal prospect. Now, creating a good persona is really part science and part art, right? You have some actual data from your best clients, but you also have some kind of assumptions that help you complete the picture. And I know when I create audience profiles, or personas, I go into detail, what they wear, what they drive, where they go out to eat, etc., etc. And these are all things that I can kind of extrapolate from what I know about these folks, and in turn it helps me know them a little bit better. And one attribute that can really help you complete that picture of the ideal prospect that you're trying to reach is determining what that person's DiSC profile might be. Now, DiSC, D-I-S-C, is a personal assessment tool that's used in a wide variety of environments. It's used in sales, in team building, in leadership, in parenting, in marketing. Personally, I first learned about it in some sales training that I attended, but it's really helpful in a number of situations. So I thought we would talk about using it today. So what DiSC does is it plots a personality on a grid with 4 main quadrants, and whichever quadrant you wind up in represents your dominant personality type. Now, when I learned about it in sales training, they had a really cute way of introducing it. They said, if we think about people as birds, we can come up with 4 basic types. You have your eagles, you have your parrots, you have your doves, and you have your owls. So just keep those 4 birds in mind as we go through the different personality types in the DiSC profiling system. So right now I want you to picture an XY axis that creates 4 quadrants. And in the upper left quadrant, picture the letter D. Now D stands for dominance. And a person whose dominant personality trait is in this quadrant is, and this is according to the DiSC website, they are motivated by winning, competition, and success. They prioritize accepting challenges, taking action, and achieving immediate results. So not the most patient folks around. They're described as direct, demanding, forceful, strong-willed, driven, and determined, fast-paced, and self-confident. They may be limited by a lack of concern, or what may be perceived as a lack of concern for others, impatience, and open skepticism. So they're not afraid to tell you when they think what you're saying is bunk. And they may fear being seen as vulnerable or even being taken advantage of. And finally, the D personality type values competency, actions, concrete results, personal freedom, and challenges. Now, If we look at the roles that are played in corporate America, the D would be the classic CEO personality. Very bottom line, very results oriented, not a huge fan of details. Just tell me what I need to know, and I pay people to take care of the rest of it. And in our bird analogies, the D's would be the eagles. So if you think about an eagle, they fly very high above the surface. They hunt alone, and they only swoop down when they're hunting. So they're flying. They see some prey, they swoop down, they grab it, and they go right back to where they came from. And that's kind of like, that's very much in line with this personality type. So those are your D types in the DiSC profiling system. So going back to our grid, now let's move from the upper left quadrant to the upper right quadrant, and I want you to picture the letter I. Now I stands for influence. And a person in the I quadrant, again quoting from the DiSC website, they would be motivated by things like social recognition, group activities, and relationships. They prioritize taking action, collaboration, and expressing enthusiasm. They can be described as convincing, magnetic, enthusiastic, warm, trusting, and optimistic. They may be limited by being impulsive and disorganized and may have a lack of follow-through. And what they fear is loss of influence, disapproval, and being ignored. Now, what the I values is coaching and counseling, freedom of expression, and democratic relationships. So if we go back to our types from corporate America, I would think the I's would be the classic example of the salesperson, someone who is very social, very collaborative, maybe a little on the chatty side, very concerned with appearances, and sometimes maybe just a little bit impulsive. And getting back to our bird analogy, the way that DiSC was presented to me, the I's are the parrots. So they're very social, they're very chatty, they're very expressive, and of course they have those beautiful feathers, that beautiful plumage, and they're very concerned about looking their best. So those are the I's. Moving on, so if you move to the lower right quadrant, which would be just below the I's, where we were just discussing, I want you to picture the letter S. And S stands for steadiness. And a person whose dominant personality would be in the S quadrant would have these characteristics. They would be motivated by cooperation, opportunities to help, and sincere appreciation. They prioritize giving support, collaboration, and maintaining stability. They're described as calm, patient, predictable, deliberate, stable, and consistent. They may be limited by being maybe sometimes indecisive. They may be overly accommodating, and they may be resistant to change. Your typical S-type would fear change, loss of stability, and offending others, and they value loyalty, helping others, and security. So if the D's are the classic CEOs and the I's are the classic salespeople, I think you tend to find a lot of S's in things like human resources, or maybe in a lot of nonprofit organizations. People who are very concerned with relationships, very people-oriented. They're very concerned about morale, about the mood or what's going on, and they're very concerned with stability. These folks do not like the ups and downs, if you look on the grid, the S's are the opposite of the D's. So the D's kind of dig the competitive roller coaster and the ups and downs, and the S's are just not into that at all. They like things nice and stable. And getting back to our bird analogy, the S's would be the doves. So they're very peace-loving, they're very relationship-oriented, and they like things nice and predictable. So in the final quadrant, moving from the lower right to the lower left quadrant, I want you to picture the letter C. And C stands for conscientiousness. And a person in the C quadrant, again, all this is according to the DiSC website, they would be motivated by opportunities to gain knowledge, to show their expertise, and to do quality work. They prioritize accuracy, stability, and challenging assumptions. They're described as careful, cautious, systematic, diplomatic, accurate, and tactful. A C-type may be limited by being overly critical, sometimes overanalyzing, and sometimes may tend to isolate themselves. Their main fears are being criticized and being wrong, and they value quality and accuracy. So the C's, so let's look at our corporate types. So the D's would be the classic CEO, the I's would be the salespeople, and the S's would be the more human resources types, and the C's are going to be your typical engineers. They're going to be your accountants. They're going to be your scientists. They tend to be very linear, very logical, very detail-oriented. So if you are presenting any facts to these folks, you had better make for darn sure that you have double and triple checked first, because if anything winds up being inaccurate, these folks will just write you off completely. And I know, because I have some very strong C influences in my own personality. And again, getting back to our bird analogy, the C's are the owls. They're very wise, and they're very knowledge driven, and they're very focused. So those are the 4 basic DiSC types, and you can learn a whole lot more about this if you go to DiSCprofile.com. That's DiSCprofile.com. And there are also a huge number of books written about DiSC, about how it applies to parenting and management and sales, and there are tons of blogs about using DiSC. So if you want to learn more about it, there's a wealth of information available, especially for you C's, because I know you like to do your homework. So what does all this mean for us content marketers? So getting back to our audiences, and if you look at your audience, if you look at those personas that you've created, you can kind of speculate on what main type those folks may be. You can look at what you know about them, what jobs they have, what kind of education they have, and kind of start to put them into one of those 4 categories. And then that can really give you some important insights that can drive how you present your content. For example, if your target audience tend to be a very high D audience. So if your target market is CEOs, that tells you a few things about how to present your content. Number 1, you are going to want to keep it right and tight, because these folks, they are not into details. They are not into flowery language. They want you to get to the point so they can get on with their business. Also, they're very focused on results. So content for content's sake is not going to cut it very well with this audience. So you had better be presenting something that will help them accomplish something, help them compete, help them get an edge over the competition. Now, going through the grid again, if there are a lot of high I's in your audience, if there are a lot of maybe sales types, if you're in B2B, or if you're in B2C, you might decide that you've got some I's in there as well. These folks are very concerned with their image and how they look to the people around them. And when you communicate with them, you would probably do very well to do a little bit of ego stroking, about a little bit of, little compliment here and there. They're also very expressive, and they like to be heard. So if you're trying to appeal to eyes, you want to make sure that you are always inviting their input. Ask them to send your comments, ask them to send you their questions, because they like to be heard. And make sure that they know you're listening. Make sure you're responding to those comments and those tweets and whatever you're receiving for them. So what if your audience contains a lot of high S types? These folks are relationship oriented, so you would do well to spend time letting them know that you understand them, and asking them questions so that you can really start building that relationship. Also, S's thrive on cooperation, so this would be a great audience to use some maybe user-generated content and also some crowdsourcing tactics. Let them partner with you in building something. They would really eat that up. And finally, if you have a lot of high C's in your audience, these are the owls, remember, again, make sure that you have all your facts lined up, double and triple check. And if you are writing a blog post, making an argument, you had better have those facts to back it up, and they better be presented clearly and logically, and there's just can't be any grounds for any groundless speculation going on. Make sure you have your facts lined up to appeal to your C audience. So that's a little primer on how you might want to start using DiSC profiles to really make your audience personas a little bit more specific and to start tailoring your content to that specific audience. Now, is DiSC a perfect system? Of course not. You might be shaking your head saying, human beings are infinitely complex and nuanced, and there's no way that they can fit into these four little categories. And I would completely agree with you. But what DiSC is, it's a handy little shorthand that can kind of help guide you in understanding these folks a little bit better and in tailoring your content to their needs and their preferences. By the way, in case you are curious, I took the DiSC profile and I am a borderline S and C. So I really want to get to know you and establish a relationship so that I can bombard you with facts and figures. So that's where I came out on that little grid. So I hope you enjoyed that. Again, if you want to know more about DiSC, go to discprofile.com. There's tons of information available. And if you want to know some specific resources, just let me know. I'm sure I can dig some up for you. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. For today's tip, I have another bit of grammar advice for you. A couple of weeks ago, a marketer friend called me up with a quick question. He was making a banner that announced food, drinks, and music for a festival, and he wanted to know if there should be a comma after the word drinks. So should it be food, comma, drinks, comma, and music, or should it be food, comma, drinks, and music? In other words, he was asking if he should use what grammarians call a serial comma. Now, this is not cereal in terms of what you eat for breakfast, but S-E-R-I-A-L, comma, and it's simply a comma used before the conjunction when you're listing a series of items. And in answer to my friend's question, it is a matter of preference whether you use a serial comma. And if you want to get really nerdy, which as a C I like to do, if you're following the Chicago Manual of Style, that resource does use the serial comma. However, the Associated Press Style Guide does not use a serial comma. I prefer to use it because it's a little more precise and it can avoid confusion in certain types of lists, but it is a matter of preference. That said, whichever way you decide to go, it is important that you stay consistent. So if you use a serial comma, use it consistently. If you decide not to use it, then leave it out on a consistent basis. And if you have any questions about the ins and outs of commas, just shoot me a quick tweet or email, and I will be happy to see if I can clear that up. Okay, campers, that is it for me this week. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. I've certainly enjoyed our time together. If you like what you've heard today, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or via the RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. I would so deeply appreciate it. For more information about content marketing, you are welcome to visit our blog at resonancecontent.com/blog, where you'll also find links to our pages on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social networks. If you'd like to email me a question to cover in an upcoming tip of the week, you can contact me anytime at rachel@resonancecontent.com. Also, our book giveaway is continuing. We are giving away 20 copies of Gary Vaynerchuk's latest book, Jab, 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 Right Hook. And you might recall that Gary was our very special interview guest a couple of weeks ago. And to find out how you can win your very own copy of his latest book, just go to resonancecontent.com/JJJRH. As always, I like to leave you with a quote, and today's is from Henry Ford. He says, "You can do anything if you have enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is the yeast that makes your hopes rise to the stars. With it, there is accomplishment. Without it, there are only alibis." Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing, and we will see you again next week. Take care.